Velkommen alle sammen. This is going to be an important video. This will be one of my favorite ones actually when we're first starting off. So as I've mentioned in other ones and as I'm going to be speaking about many times on this channel, a lot of the spells and magic and traditions that we're going to look at are recorded after the official Christianization of Scandinavia in these countries. And a lot of scholars are not very intelligent, and they say that these things can't possibly be pagan because they were written after the official Christianization of these countries. And I'm here to prove that that's a bunch of crap. Here's another video that's going to help further prove my point. So what I'm going to do is just read off a few dates, just a few quick summaries about the Christianization of different countries in Scandinavia and the Old Norse world. So we'll start with Denmark. So the first king of Denmark to convert to Christianity was in the year 812, and that's very early actually. His name was Harald Klak, and this is sometimes looked at the official Christianization of Denmark. However, nobody took that seriously. We know that Denmark was pagan for a long time after that. What happened was Denmark in the 960s was when most scholars will agree the official Christianization of Denmark happened, and this was by Harald Bluetooth. And that's, yes, if you heard it right, it is what it sounds. Bluetooth like speakers, Bluetooth like cell phone. That technology is named after this guy because he was the one who united all of Denmark and Norway. He was King Harald Bluetooth. And he was the first really official Christian king of Denmark, and this is what a lot of people regard as the official Christianization of Denmark. However, that is a bunch of crap too, because his son, just a couple of decades later, his name was Svein Forkbeard, and he basically took the country back from his father. People didn't want to be Christian, they wanted to keep their pagan traditions, and his son basically stole the throne right out from under him while he was still living as well, and sent him into exile. So the official Christianization of Denmark did not happen until, most people say it's the 960s, but it's a lot after that. As we can see, paganism was still growing strong, and he actually became king of all of England. And the Danish people and the English lived in peace, and Christians and Danish probably lived in peace in Denmark too, but paganism was still very strong. And it wasn't until the early 1000s that a real Christian king became king of Denmark, and that was Saint Canute. However, later that century, in 1086, he and his team were all murdered in a church, because they tried to impose a tax on the people of Denmark to build more churches, and the people did not like that because they were still pagan. So here we go, more than 100 years after the official Christianization of Denmark, still proof that people were very pagan still. Okay, on to Norway. So Olav Tryggvason took power of Norway, and he was the real first Christian king, and he was the most despicable Norwegian person who ever existed, in my opinion. And he just tortured everybody and forced Christianity on everybody, and that was in the year 995 he became king, and the official king of Norway was Christian. However, 5 years later, he was basically destroyed by a Danish, a Swedish, and Norwegian fleets, all pagan. And people did not like him, and he was just killed off by all of those people in a sea battle. I forget what the name was, but I will maybe do another video about that, because that's a very cool battle when Olav Tryggvason was destroyed. So paganism continued in Norway for some time after that, until Saint Olav became king. That was in the year 1015. But Norway was still pagan after that. An archdiocese was not established in Norway until the mid 1100s. And an archdiocese, that's when an archbishop is officially responsible for an area. And even after that, we still find runic inscriptions in Norway of pagan origins until well into the 1200s. So the official Christianization of Norway, 995, but we see more than 200 years after that, still pagan traditions going on. Okay, on to Sweden. So the first Christian king of Sweden was Olav Skotkonung, and he came into power in 995. This was the official Christianization of Sweden, or so scholars believe. And almost 100 years later, Adam of Bremen, as we all know, and I'll do some videos about him in later talks, but he went to the temple at Uppsala almost 100 years later, I think more than 100 years later actually, and still saw that they were doing all their pagan traditions. That was at Uppsala, Adam of Bremen's account of that. So still very, very pagan, and there was not an that's another hard Latin word, episcopal. Episcopal was not put into Sweden until 1140. So this is where a bishop was given responsibility over a certain type, and this was the mid 1100s. However, Norwegian King Sigurd went on a crusade in the early 1100s to convert some of the locals in Småland, Sweden, at that time, because they were still pagan, very out and open. So that's that. And actually, in a place called Gotland in Sweden, there was a law in place that made some pagan rituals punishable by a fine. They made blood rituals punishable by a fine, and this was in practice until the 1600s. So even 600 years after the official Christianization of Sweden, there was still pagan traditions and rituals being practiced. So that shows you there. Sweden was actually the one who most people agree paganism continued the longest. So that's Sweden. On to Finland. Paganism also lasted for a long time in Finland, but this was a different type of paganism. It wasn't Norse paganism. It wasn't Asatru. They had a different thing, but it was still paganism, and they still had similar traditions. And this was not officially Christian until the mid 1200s, more than 200 years after the official Christianization of the rest of Scandinavia, and that's when Sweden went to a crusade to Finland to basically convert everybody there. Finland is so close, especially to Sweden and Norway too, up in the north. So without a doubt, if there were a lot of pagans in Finland, they would have come into very, very close contact with Sweden, and there was probably a whole lot of pagans in Sweden also at that time, especially around the border cities. Okay, Faroe Islands. So the first chieftain was called Sigmundur. He was the first one to convert to Christianity, and this was in the late 900s. So this is sometimes regarded as the official Christianization of the Faroe Islands. However, people didn't like him. He tried to force Christianity on people, and he was tried to be killed by one other chieftain, and he got away. Sigmundur got away, and he ran into some of his own farms in his own area, and he was killed there too. So people did not like him. That's the Faroe Islands. Then we go to Iceland, the last one. A guy named Turgeir Torkelsen. He was leader of the pagan faction in Iceland. Christians and pagans lived kind of peacefully there, but it was still pagan. For sure, Turgeir was the leader of the Althing there, so basically the judge over all the country's political issues and war issues and all those problems. There was no king there, but he was basically the one who ruled over that. So he declared that Iceland would be a Christian country in the year 1000. However, He only did this after really a lot of pressure from Olav Tryggvason, the guy, the bad guy that I mentioned before. He sent many raiding parties into Iceland, killed people, sent priests there, tried to force people into Christianity. They didn't like it. And in the year 1000, he just eventually said, okay, no more trade with Iceland. He stopped all Icelandic boats from coming to Norway and trading, and he took prisoners. He took hostages until Iceland would convert to Christianity officially. So then they did. Turgeir converted them officially in the year of 1000. However, they still stated that pagan rituals were allowed to continue in private. That was actually written in the laws. It was going to be a Christian country officially, but pagan traditions would be allowed to continue in private, and this was allowed for many years later. So that just shows everybody that the official Christianization of these countries mean absolutely nothing. Paganism would have continued for a long time after. Exactly how long after? Well, we're going to look at that in other videos, but it would have been many hundreds of years. And that's about it for this one. See you later.